All right, welcome back to episode 4 of the Relationship Comeback Podcast. This is your host, Carter Anderson, and today we have a special guest for 2 reasons. Number one, most importantly, he's a huge North Carolina Tar Heel fan. And so you already know all the words and wisdom that's going to come out of his mouth is A1. It's going to be incredible. He's got the right perspective on him. Cheers for the right color of blue. So you already know he's legit. Brother Thibault, real quick, will you let us know how long you've been a Tar Heel fan and why you chose to be a Tar Heel fan?
Great question, Carter. And yeah, I was raised in North Carolina, and so when I talk about it, my accent comes back a little bit. But excuse me, being from a military family, I was raised down on the coast, southeast coast of North Carolina, and since 1982, I have been a Tar Heel and love the university. Get out there as often as I can to go to games, and anyway, all sports. American by birth, Carolina by the grace of God.
I love that. Was 82, was that Jordan, the year Jordan won the championship?
It
You're
was,
you're
yeah.
the lucky charm. Ever since you've been around, we've just been rolling.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, well, that's very kind of you to say. I was a little frustrated that Valvano won the following year,
That's,
but anyway, you take a look at the records in the big picture. State, NC State, they can't keep up.
we
So
gotta let them get one. They went to the Final Four.
yeah,
They got to get it every once in a while, but we'll let them have that. That's cool. Well,
there
do you
you
want to
go.
give our listeners a little bit of a background on like kind of who you are and kind of your field of work and expertise so they can kind of get a picture before diving into some of the topics we want to talk about today of kind of maybe the expertise you bring to this conversation?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. My license, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been in practice, been licensed since about 1998. And my PhD is in counseling psychology, but I've always leaned into the marriage and family therapy field because of the emphasis on systemic relationships. We know that relationships and individuals don't exist kind of in a vacuum, that the family system really is the core of change for people who want to change. And so I've always been licensed as a marriage and family therapist. And some of the background, two-term past president of the Utah Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. I just concluded 9 years being on the board of directors and the president of board of directors of the Association for Training on Trauma and Attachment in Children. And I love that organization. And some of the highlights, um, I was trained directly by Dr. John Gottman, who many people know is, one of the foremost researchers on relationships in the world, researcher, psychologist. And then recently I taught with Dr. Stephen Porges, who's the founder of polyvagal theory, which is just blowing up in medical schools and in therapy schools as far as a theory on safety and relationship safety. And so I've been so blessed to rub shoulders with some really phenomenal, fantastic researchers, teachers, and people who have lent their expertise to me to
Mhm.
help me become a better therapist.
Can I ask you again, clearly, just as you're talking, you're way too overqualified to be on this small podcast. So again, I really appreciate you taking the time. But
That's nonsense.
what has kept you in this field? Because I think at least, usually you're like, all right, I want it. Like, at least for me, that's kind of my career path right now is trying to pursue a similar master's program and things like that. But I want to do it to help kids my age and, help them build relationships. But what keeps you in it? Because I think that probably changes throughout the course of a career.
Yeah, that's a great question. And what's interesting is relating to that, Carter, is the idea that my career has kind of gone into different chapters. And so I started off working with teens in treatment programs and did the training with John Gottman. And so then I opened a private practice and focused really with adults and marriages and relationships. And I love that. I really, really enjoyed that. But I also knew I was doing research on adopted children because I was troubled by how many adopted kids were in treatment programs and in mental health.
Mhm.
A dirty little secret out there is that 30 to 40% of all the teenagers in all the treatment of mental health in the country are adopted. But they're less than 2% of the population. So I did research on that. When I did my PhD, my dissertation was on the incidence of adopted youth in residential treatment, and we just became passionate about adoption causes. because those folks are underrepresented in the mental health field. So having a passion for that. And now I'm switching gears again and working with young adults and still dealing though with some of the challenges for adopted young adults,
Hmm.
dealing with some of the mental health challenges, that are faced by a lot of young people your age, uh, because there's not a lot of resources out there. So that's a long way to say I'm passionate about what we do, and I believe in marriage and family therapy. I believe in systemic work, and like most folks who become clinicians, a lot of it stems from our own childhood. And I want to help people the way I wished I would have gotten help when I was a child, and things were deteriorating in my own home, my parents divorcing, and some of the things that I suffered. So, um, just really believing in what we do, and that we are of help to people.
I love that. That's kind of why I started this podcast, because again, there's some material out there on dating and relationships, but even specifically to our culture, being in Utah, there's just like,
Mhm.
I remember, just you're trying to do your personal study. You're like, man, I wish there was a conference talk on dating
Yeah.
more so than this or whatever. And there's just not a lot of resources. And I'm like, clearly, there are some, but I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm just gonna start making content because I'm gonna be the person that I wish I had in my life. And that I think that goes for dating is like, all right, well, I want to become the person that I wish I had in my life, and whatever I know I'll be blessed for it, and hopefully other people will as well. But I think maybe it would be a good place to start is I think, and especially maybe with your background in trauma, and I don't want to use the word trauma lightly, but I think
Mhm.
I was listening to a podcast and they said anytime your whatever mental stimulus goes above like a 7 out of 10 out of pain, there's an opportunity for like trauma. And again, that's relative to the person experiencing it. There's an opportunity
Uh,
for trauma to kind of start to develop. Um, and I think in the dating world, the constant rejection, maybe if it happens once, it's not a big deal. It happens twice, it's not a big deal.
mhm.
When you've been going on first dates and you've been going, being ghosted, or relationships aren't working out and you're just really struggling to build connections yourself, I think it starts
Mhm.
to build up over time. And then one incident becomes that 8 or 9 stress, like what is wrong with me? Like why can't I figure this out? And so I think maybe our first topic might be a good place to start is maybe what's a healthy way to deal with that constant rejection? Maybe what's a good way to view yourself while doing that? So I don't know if you have any initial thoughts, and then we can kind of talk about that for a little bit. But how do you deal with in a healthy way the constant rejection that does come from dating, especially when it's just like you're not seeing much success at all?
Sure. Great question. Great question. And one of the challenges is people, we're living such a society now, and you know this, Carter, where everything is posted to social media and everybody's putting forth their best images and living this life, and you wonder, why can't I have a life like that? And I think first of all, it's important to stay in reality that most people have a ton of rejection when they're trying to find, a significant other.
Hmm.
Most of us go through life having faced those kind of situations. And so first acknowledge, validate your feelings, acknowledge the fact that, yeah, this is real. I am hurting, I'm grieving. Especially if you've had strong feelings for someone, give yourself permission to feel what you need to feel there. Something else I would say is separate your own worth from the outcome. Rejection in and of itself does not get to define who I am, nor does it define who you are. Just because someone may not be the right match doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you.
Hmm.
Okay. It means that they're not the right match. And, one way to look at this, Carter, is what is the purpose of dating?
For me is to try and find someone to spend my life with that we're compatible and we'll work hard together. So I think that to me that's kind of the end goal, is to find that spouse to be able to spend your
Yeah,
life with and create a family.
sure. Because you want that outcome. And so if you find that you're going through relationships and breaking up and it's not working out, in some way, dating is actually working. The process is working because what you're doing is eliminating people who will not be compatible with that outcome.
Hmm.
All right. And so a lot of folks will say that to me. It's like, I feel like I'm just, it's never right. And dating doesn't work for me. And I say, well, actually, it is working for you. You're eliminating all these people who aren't going to be a good match for you. So the dating process in and of itself is working. Compatibility is complex. I don't believe in soulmates, you know, but compatibility does require, there's a lot of variables there, some of which are outside your control. And you have to let go of what you don't control. And in that process, practicing self-compassion, focusing on what you can control, um, and reframing some of that rejection, which is, okay, are there things that I can work on? Is there feedback for me? Are there common themes in what's going on? Do I use language that people are offended by? Is there certain things that I portray or come across as that I need to take a look at and maybe work at myself? Are there things that I can do better at? And then part of it too is viewing dating as an opportunity for growth and learning rather than a measure of your worth.
Mhm.
Okay, it's an opportunity to learn from the people that you're associating with, even if you don't end up with them in the long run. It doesn't have to be, a determination for you of your own self-worth and your own value. And then finally, I'd say take care of yourself. Be patient, stick with it. But the self-care piece is important, making sure that you're taking time to focus yourself on yourself, taking care of your spiritual self, your physical self, your emotional self by being with other people, being with people who lift you up and taking time for yourself. There's a lot that goes into making relationships work. And so there's this an illusion I hope we can dispel that we find soulmates and it just goes from there. And that's
Mhm.
just not reality.
Yeah, I think a hard part for dating is that, like again, like you're saying, we see what everybody wants us to see on social media, and so again,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I don't see the reality of how hard a marriage is. Because to me, I'm like, it seems great. It seems like you got that partner there all the time. You have your BFF. It's just like a movie all the time. And again, I know it's not like that, but again, there's not as much framing for that in my mind. And so then it's like, well, my life stinks compared to whatever I'm seeing on social media.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and if I can touch on that, one of the things, I loved working with Dr. John Gottman, who is really the foremost researcher on marriages, I think, in the world right now. He would tell us every relationship is a clash of cultures. Okay. And the reality, Carter, is most relationships are boring. Most relationships are pretty humdrum. They're not what we see in Hollywood. They're not what we see in social media. Most people come home at the end of the day and they're kind of blah, right? And here's an example of the clash of cultures, okay? Because every family, healthy families, disagree as much as unhealthy families, if not more, because they're not afraid to bring things up, right?
Hmm.
So here's an example of a clash of cultures. When my wife and I were married, I came from, like I said, Southeast North Carolina, and we were a pretty poor family, didn't have a lot. My wife's family, while not wealthy, she's always been comfortable, right? So if you can picture this, we're newlyweds. We're at Utah State, where I was getting my degree. And we decided because she's better with money that she was going to pay the bills. She'd handle the bills. So she goes into the bedroom because we had this tiny little apartment and she's paying the bills and she comes out with this very serious look on her face, Carter. And she goes, I just paid the bills and we have $25 to last us the next 2 weeks. And I said, are you serious? And she goes, yeah. And I said, that's fantastic. You paid the bills and we have money. And she goes, no, you don't get it. We only have $25. And I said, no, you don't get it. We have $25. So I ask you, who's right and who's wrong?
I mean, you're both, again, like you said, it's that clash of different backgrounds. So you're
Yeah.
both, yeah.
Yeah. And so, these relationship ups and downs are going to happen for everybody because you're introducing, and I don't care if you grew up next door to one another,
Hmm.
you're going to see things differently and giving each other permission to see things differently because of your backgrounds, because of the influences you've had in your life, or what makes a successful relationship, not the avoidance of conflict or challenges. And again, you don't typically see that in social media and in Hollywood. You see the glorious vacations and you see the happiness and everybody's thrilled. Good for them, but that's not reality for most of us.
Well, I like how you're even saying like to not even in a good relationship, like most or a good family, they're not avoiding conflict or disagreements. They're just, being able to be more open about it. I could see that in a
Mhm.
dating sense of, all right, I'm not necessarily trying to avoid rejection, but just how can I deal with it better? And because, like you
Mhm.
said, if you're being rejected, if it's not working out, you're just, finding different ways to not make the light bulb and eventually it will turn on. I would be curious. You said one of the things you need to do is to detach your worth from that acceptance
Mhm.
versus rejection. I think for me that's super hard because again, like my mental health background comes in OCD and perfectionism. And so for me, I'm just constantly like beating up on myself and figuring out any little way that I can improve. And again, I'm not perfect in any way, but I really do try and take care of myself. I try and be very aware. And so it's hard for
Mhm.
me to detach that like worth of being accepted. So I'd be curious, what are some like specific applications to that of like, all right, how do I actually detach my worth from X girl that says yes or no?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. Um, Part of it is the mental game we play, right? And so you're somebody who has this locus of control that says if something goes wrong, then it must be my fault.
Mhm.
Well, first of all, who says it's wrong? Who says it's a fault? So challenging that perception, why does it have to be somebody wrong? Why can't it be two people who are simply not compatible and doesn't mean there's a fault in either one of them? Another thought, another way to look at that as well is the idea that can it not be their stuff, right? Well, you're telling yourself it's my stuff and I'm the reason it's not working out. Why can't you attribute something to them that maybe their stuff's going on? Maybe they're not ready for the relationship. Maybe they're not ready to be vulnerable. Maybe they feel like, and this is actually pretty common, you're too good for them. So they're just going to end it now because in the end, when you really get to know them, you're going to dump them anyway.
Mhm.
And so let me just save myself the heartache of that. And I'm just going to end it now because I'm not ready to be vulnerable. There's a lot of variables that tie into the way we do that, the way we put our worth into the outcome. The other thing I would say uh, to that is just recognizing again that there's so many complexities to relationships and realizing it's very very normal for people to struggle in being vulnerable and in allowing people in, and when it works, fantastic, wonderful.
Mhm.
But you got to go through a lot of trying and a lot of challenges um, to really find that person. Now the other thing I would add is I want you to do an experiment, Carter. Okay, well, let's
All
do
right,
an
let's try
experiment
it.
right now. Okay, I want you to think about every emotion, every feeling you've had, every urge you've had in the last 24 hours. If you acted on every single one of them within the last 24 hours, where would you be right now?
I don't I probably wouldn't have
And
gone to bed because I would have just been like watching TV or playing on my phone or, those little like urges to do that or I don't know. That's probably I probably would just be super tired and just playing video games or something like that or wasting time or things like that. That's probably where I would be. And I probably wouldn't be very happy. I was in kind of a bad mood yesterday. I went to the gym and I shot well, but I kept missing shots that I know I did. So I probably would have been pretty grumpy about it. But that I don't know. That's probably where I would be. Very tired, wasting a lot of time and in a pretty bad mood.
well, a side note, when I ask that question, I do that experiment with people. The most common answer, Carter, is jail. I would be in
Okay.
jail if I, I kid you not. So it makes me worry about society on the whole. But anyway, that's a different story. The reason I ask you that is why didn't you act on every one of those urges and feelings? Why didn't you?
Um I mean, again, one thing that just with struggling with OCD and mental health throughout my life, I try and recognize where thoughts are coming from,
Mhm.
and it's pretty in that realm. It's pretty easy for me to tell where they're coming from. Like, all right, if I'm gonna stay up all night and play video games or scroll Instagram, I that's not gonna help me get to where I want to go. So that's kind of where I view it is where's this thought gonna lead me, and I don't want to go down that path. So.
Yeah, which is fantastic because what's happening there is your limbic system is communicating through what we call this neural substrate with your lower prefrontal cortex, right? It's an information superhighway. You have urges and then you think through them and go, and that's not smart. I'm not going to do that. Why do we not do that with relationship feelings, right? We give so much weight
Hmm.
to these feelings we have about dating and rejection. It's sort of like sometimes I feel like the best therapist in the world. Sometimes I feel like the worst therapist in the world. Neither one is true. They're just feelings. So why do we give some feelings so much weight as if they reflect the reality of the situation versus other feelings and urges? We just go, I'm not going to do that because that's not good. So going back to your original question about separating our worth from the outcome, they're just feelings. And yes, they're real. And yes, we have to acknowledge and validate them. At the end of the day, do they really reflect the reality of our value? Most likely not, because most of us are going to be terribly hard on ourselves, worse than anybody else,
Hmm.
and very, very judgmental. Um, it's like President Uchtdorf has said, and I think it applies to ourselves. Um, we need our love more than we need our own judgment.
Do you have any like for kids my age direct like things you can do every day to try and kind of recenter yourself on that? Because again, like I'm right now I'm not on the dating apps, but when you're on the dating apps, it's just like that constant like this is I mean you're just getting rejected over and over and over again, and you get a couple like for people that are really like that this is something that they're going through every single day. Do you have any direct like ways to recenter or like journaling prompts or anything like that that you're like, I would recommend to do this if you're in a situation where you're potentially seeing a lot of rejection to try and like maintain this positive sense of self-worth to be able to detach from that?
You know, one of there's a lot of ideas about managing that. You've highlighted a couple of them, such as journaling and writing down the things we're telling ourselves, documenting our thoughts, what have you. But one simple way, and I call it the jury question, is would the 12 people closest to me, who I trust the most in this world, agree with this sentiment I'm feeling right now,
Hmm.
and maybe bouncing it off of them and asking, I'm struggling, I'm struggling with this rejection. And here's what I'm telling myself. I want to know what you really think. And then being open to the feedback. But would a jury of those people agree with what I'm telling myself? And if not, then maybe I'm being too hard on myself and I need to figure out what it is about this situation that I'm just putting it on myself rather than keeping it real with myself. There's so many variables that go into that. The other thing is, what is the purpose of my dating right now? Is it to fill my cup
Hmm.
or is it to find companionship? Because if I'm already setting it up that I need that person to feel an empty spot in me, then that's putting a lot of pressure on somebody very early in a potential relationship. And that can happen at a neurobiological level. We used to say unconscious, Carter, but now we don't say that anymore because it sounds too Freudian. So it's not an unconscious level, it's a neurobiological level where people feel that pressure and they feel like, okay, wait a minute, this feels too intense too soon for me. And so maybe one of the things I can do if I'm constantly being rejected is take a look at what am I looking to fill here? What's my purpose? And someone once said, it's beautiful when two halves come together and make a whole,
Hmm.
but it's success when two wholes come together and form a relationship. And so if I'm trying to use somebody to fill a need in me, it could be that I'm really reaching too much in an unhealthy way for that relationship and scaring someone off.
How do you again like obviously you probably want those things filled in your life the
Sure.
to be able to have someone there. How do you maybe not even present, but like actually believe like I'm going into this to try and find companionship versus trying to fill a void in my life? How do I present that on a first date, or how do I present that, or like actually believe that to try and shift that perspective so that because I again like you're saying that that pressure probably surely is felt within yourself, but I'm sure there are times where the other person is also feeling that. Like how do you
Sure.
try and shift from, all right, maybe I'm just I do want companionship, but I also have this void. I'm trying to feel how do you move it more to that healthy place of I'm trying to find companionship. If the rejection comes, that's just another way to, that wasn't a fit and moving on to the next thing.
Yeah. Taking a look at personal growth, and what are your expectations? right? Someone said in a BYU speech not too long ago, I love this quote. It was, expectations are preconceived resentments. And if we go into it with certain expectations, then ultimately we can be creating, these preconceived resentments. The idea is to just calm your expectations, go into ease into things, and take a look at, am I trying to fill a loneliness gap? Am I trying to fill a depression gap? What am I looking for? And if there are needs that are there that could be clinical, depression or
Mhm.
anxiety, um, if they're impacting your life and emotional stability, dating could actually be contraindicated because it can add more stress and hinder your healing process. And so being self-aware, what is my goal in this? What is my purpose? If I want companionship and I want to create a friendship and then ease that into a relationship, fabulous. But if I'm putting all these expectations into it and front loading it, then maybe I'm not doing this for the healthiest reasons. Maybe I'm doing it again to fill that cup for me, which puts a lot of pressure on them, makes people feel uneasy. Um, and we all have, let me be clear, we all have anxiety on first dates and
Mhm.
second dates and third dates, right? That's normal. That's that wonderful, wonderful stress that we feel in those moments. Um, but if we come away from that feeling like a failure or being very self-critical, then that might be speaking more to something beyond that typical anxiety. That might be speaking more to, what am I trying to fill within myself, that I'm expecting this person to take care of.
I think that kind of leads perfectly into the next question I have for you of like, and again, I'm not excluding myself from this group because again, I'm sure I'm not coming to the table on every single date in the best headspace or anything like that. But I see a lot of my friends, I see a lot of my family members in similar situations, and it seems like someone's mental health and their kind of emotional well-being can really negatively impact their ability to form and make connections with other people. From
Mhm.
your perspective, kind of what's a good gauge to be like, am I in a good spot to date? Because I think some people they take it to the extreme of I need to be perfect, ready to go, and then they're
Yeah.
never ready to go, and they're just constantly leading people on, and it never happens. And then you got the people that are like, I'm just gonna go for it, and they're bringing all this baggage, and they're just taking people down with them. Kind of what's a healthy way to try and gauge for yourself, like, am I in an emotional and mental state to be able to be open to dating? Like, I guess maybe what are some signs for things like you're in a good spot, or maybe some signs it's like, all right, maybe you got some work to take or work to do on yourself before we try and bring in other people?
Yeah. Great question. One, and I'm thinking of my own experience. I had some childhood trauma, right, that I experienced, and I remember when I would date young women, in my late teens and early 20s, before and then later after my mission, I struggled with anxiety, severe anxiety in those, because I felt like I was telling myself I had to be perfect. And it felt like I was reaching up to find that partner. I never felt equal to that partner or good enough for. And in the reality was different than how it felt. And so really doing an internal test, what's your process like? And where a lot of that stems from is our own attachment. Okay. None of us have perfect childhoods. None of us have to have perfect childhoods to be able to have adult relationships that are secure and very meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be able to make sense of anything traumatic that may have happened during our childhood, especially with caregivers or other, parents or other significant others in your family, because that's where we learn how to trust and be vulnerable in relationships. Okay. And the more I study the neuroscience behind relationships, and the more I study the dynamics in relationships, the more I understand our attachment, our willingness to be vulnerable, to be open, and to be able to take the ebbs and flows of relationships is impacted significantly by the attachment style we developed with our parents. And so again, I really want to emphasize this. None of us have perfect childhoods.
Mm,
I had a very abusive childhood, but I can earn secure attachment with my wife and other people because of making sense of what happened to me as a child. And so if we're in relationships and we're really struggling and not sure whether we're in a space to do that, take a look at how you see your childhood. Take a look at how you see those relationships and maybe do a little work on those relationships if needed. Many of us won't need to do that work. Many of us come through that. We're very resilient people, but those things can create issues if we haven't made sense of any kind of trauma or abuse that's happened to us. How did your family communicate about emotions and feelings? What did you learn from your parents about relationships? Whether it was verbalized or not, you were taught, right? And if emotions weren't discussed, things weren't verbalized and thrown out there, it can be really, really difficult to express your feelings or needs effectively. And then that creates misunderstandings and needs emotional disconnection. You don't want to be vulnerable to other people, or you become the opposite. If you felt rejected or you struggle with attachment with your parents, you become very clingy. And that's what I did.
mm,
I noticed that in myself. I became very clingy. I didn't want to not be with that person, or we become possessive. We become extremely jealous of somebody spending time with someone else, even if it's non-romantic relationships, and we start to, try to control those situations. Those are all signs that we might not be in a space to be dating right now, that we've got our own work to do. Our emotional availability, if emotionally we're withdrawn from people, um, that could be a sign of depression or anxiety, because it's hard to engage in emotional intimacy and be fully present when we're dealing with those things. Um, Fear of rejection. If we struggle with this fear of rejection, you know, um, it might avoid us to it may lead us to avoid dating or potential partners away, or be very judgmental of ourselves. And so, those are all signs that maybe we're not in the best spot um, to be looking for someone else right now. Um, yeah.
well, just as you're talking, I'm just like, it's amazing that anyone is able to form relationships. Because I'm like, I can think of friends or families or myself, and it's like I think we all fall into one of those categories to some extent. Like you said, all of us, none of us have a perfect childhood. So I guess maybe what's kind of the balance there of like, okay, well maybe I do struggle with these things, or I have a little bit of work to do on myself. How do you balance that with also trying to put yourself out there and not do damage to other people? Like how can you kind of gauge when you're ready to take your baggage with you or your issues and try and go out there and form relationships with other people? Because again, I don't think there's a moment where you'll be looking in the mirror and you're like, right, I go through all my trauma or all my issues, I've checked off all those boxes, now I'm ready to go. That's never going to happen. So how do you kind of know when you are ready or you're in a healthier spot to be like, okay, maybe I can try now?
Well, one thought might be when you're actively working on your mental health, and I'm not saying everybody needs to go to therapy, but for those who would need it, engaging in therapy, practicing your self-care, and having a library of healthy coping mechanisms, right? How's your emotional intelligence? Can you handle a no? Do you act out in ways that demonstrate self-harm, or are you handling things in healthy ways? And by self-harm, I mean, pornography or substances or gambling, or all those things are maladaptive coping mechanisms. Or do we try to handle things? None of us do it perfectly, but
Mhm.
do we try to handle things in healthy ways through prayer, through talking to other people, through journaling, through taking time to exercise to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. Um, and how would we rate our sense of self? Do we feel good about who we are? Do we see ourselves as a child of God? Do we see our own innate worth? Or do we only matter when we're with somebody else?
Mhm.
You know, we're ready to date when we know that we can. It's so interesting when we can be alone, then we know we're really ready to be with someone else. How about your ability to communicate your needs? Can you express your emotions to others? Can you express your needs to others? Uh, are you okay with having boundaries with people? And or is that anxiety inducing, right? Do you practice healthy conflict resolution? Because it's not that people have conflict, it's the repair that counts. And so, how are your relationships with the people closest to you? Are they strained? Do you struggle, or the majority of the time, are they pretty good? And when you do have these ruptures, are you able to repair them? You're willing to be emotionally vulnerable. You know, you're able to extend some trust. Isn't every relationship at some degree an extension of trust, that we're going to trust that our partner's going to be there for us? And so when we feel like we can extend that trust, that's a really good sign that we're in a space to be vulnerable, which means engaging in a relationship. And you're excited about the idea. You have energy, you got passion to go out and to date, and you feel good about it, rather than this is something, again, I'm trying to fulfill a need in me, as opposed to I just want to go enjoy a relationship.
Mhm.
And that, there's a difference.
I just as you're talking, I'm just curious, is the application for this same for men and women? Because again, like if I'm a guy, I'm like, okay, I can maybe start to see some of those traits in girls, and then maybe that to me that's an indication that they might not be ready. And so then that's an opportunity for me to not pursue that. I don't have the perspective of a female, but are these traits or attachment styles, are they pretty equal across the board, of like you can tell if someone is an anxious attachment style or an avoidant attachment style? Is it pretty similar for guys and girls, in the sense of, as I'm going out there dating, looking for people, to be able to tell, okay, maybe that's a sign to me that they're not in a space uh, regarding men and females?
Mhm. Yeah, good, great question, Carter. So you may remember years ago there was a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. You may be too young for that. So,
I've
but
heard of
anyway,
it, but I have not read it.
yeah, yeah. And it was written by a gentleman named John Gray. And John Gray had never done any research with couples. His license was a driver's license. He didn't have a license to practice mental health therapy or marital therapy or what have you. But he wrote a very successful book based on the idea that men and women are very, very different. And it helped a lot of couples. Some research showed that it didn't help as many couples because it emphasized differences as opposed to similarities. So, to your question, Dr. Gottman, the gentleman that I worked with who'd done tons of studies, Nobel quality research, he found that men and women are far more alike in what they want in relationships and in their styles than they are different. And at the end of the day, we want acceptance, we want reciprocity, and we want to know our partner's got loyalty and is going to be there and has our back, right? We also want that spark, that passion that gets ignited. We want trust. All of those things are important for us men and women. And so at the end of the day, we're far more alike than we are dissimilar when it comes to what we want in relationships. Yeah, there are certain differences, and especially in the way we respond to challenges. Um, Men typically do withdraw, not because we don't care in relationships, but because if we can't fix it and we start to become emotionally engaged, we care so much, we don't want to make it worse. So we disengage.
Mhm.
And it looks like we don't care. It looks like we're just walking away. But in fact, we care so much. We just, more than anything, we don't want to make it worse. And if I can't fix it, I don't want to deal with it and make it worse. Women, on the other hand, are engagers. It's so interesting because in a relationship, Ben will often complain that she keeps bringing things up. Well, when women feel heard in the relationship, they stop bringing things up because they feel heard. And so you can see where this approach avoidance happens, where women approach, try to engage their partners, and the men disengage if they can't fix the problem. And it looks like they don't care. And this creates this cycle. So in some ways we're dissimilar, but by far, ultimately at the end of the day, we both want to be accepted and trust our partner and feel secure in that relationship. Far more alike than different.
I think that's helpful to, at least for me to know, because sometimes it feels like me versus them. At least that's
Mhm.
sometimes how I feel. It's like, oh, it's just me versus all these girls, and they're just ruining my life. And to try and maybe put it more into the perspective of like we're all we're kind of all on the same team here to an extent. We all kind of want the same things, and maybe the way we interact with and kind of go about these things is a lot more similar than we think, and trying to kind of
Mhm.
self-reflect on that. I think kind of going in. Yeah, go
One
ahead.
thought on that, Carter, is that I've told myself through the years, just because love doesn't come the way I want doesn't mean it's not coming.
I probably should get that put on my wall in my room, or get like a tattoo of it on my wrist so I see it all the time. It's a good reminder. Obviously, you spent, I think you said you got your degree, it was in 1992 or 98
No, I got my license in
license.
'98 as a marriage and family therapist. Yeah.
So we're going on almost, that'd be 20 years. No,
Yeah,
almost
I'm
30.
yeah, almost 30. I
Okay.
prefer to think of it almost 20. I appreciate that sentiment.
Okay.
We can stick with that if you'd like.
Okay. So with your, 30 years of nearly 30 years of experience in this, what do you think are some blind spots that we have as a society regarding relationships? Like, what are things that we're neglecting? What are things that maybe we don't think is a big deal that really is a big deal? Whether it's dating, whether it's relationships that you're like, man, I think we really need to reconsider how we're going about this, or how we're handling this, or how much emphasis we're putting here. Again, I'm sure there's lots of different things, but just as you had a chance to think about that, what comes to mind? Because again, one of my purposes of this, I so badly want to do my part to try and change this culture to get to a healthier spot. And so someone with such experience and such a great perspective, to me, I really value whatever insights you have. And I again, I think it's a great start to be like, all right, how can we get into a more healthier spot where more meaningful connections can start to happen?
Sure. I think a couple blind spots right now. One is we mentioned this, the idea of Hollywood and social media, right? The things that are portrayed in Hollywood, and it's fun. And the reason it's in the movies is because it's a fantasy. It takes us away from the humdrum of really real life, which can be very, very boring. The physical intimacy depicted in most Hollywood movies is nothing like real life. Okay. The way social media portrays people at their happiest, things like that. And there are incredible moments of joy. There are incredible moments of intimacy. There are wonderful times. But if we compare ourselves to this standard that's unrealistic, we're always going to be disappointed. So that's one blind spot. Another one that I think is getting far more attention, and your generation's having to deal with it a lot more than mine ever did. And that has to do with our technology. Um, a friend and colleague of mine is Dr. Don Grant. Don is the chair of the American Psychological Association's Media and Technology Division. And he is doing some groundbreaking research on the impact of iPhones and technology on relationships. As a matter of fact, he's actually proposing in the next Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is kind of like, quote unquote, the Bible we all use in mental health,
Mhm.
right? For the next one, he's going to propose a new attachment disorder called present but absent attachment. And that is people who are present, physically present, but emotionally and cognitively absent because they're sitting beside somebody, including their own children, and they're on their device. All right. And how many times do you go anywhere? And I just challenge anybody to go to an airport, or go to a restaurant, or go to a public place and take a look at how many people today are sitting beside one another and on their phones,
Mhm.
on their devices. And here's the problem with that. People often ask, why are we having such high suicide rates and higher anxiety rates, and people aren't connecting? And I believe, based on what I know about neuroscience and what I'm seeing from the data, is that there's a direct correlation between iPhone front-facing cameras and anxiety levels when they introduce the front-facing camera, those kind of things. So um, what we're seeing are people who don't connect at a neurobiological level. So I'm going to geek out on you for just a minute, if you'll allow.
Perfect.
When we connect with one another, okay, in milliseconds, we interpret whether someone's safe or not, and whether we can be safe with them at a neurobiological level based on their orbital muscles, based on their faces, based on the wrinkles on their head, based on their tone, the prosody and the way they speak. Our middle ear interprets higher tones as safety and lower tones as danger, especially so for infants.
Mhm.
Okay. We interpret body language at a neurobiological level so fast, and we get safety from that, right? We get safety and we feel safe in someone's presence. And you've heard of mirror neurons, and we feel attachment and secure with certain relationships because of the way those people respond to us at a neurobiological level. That's not happening in texting. You can't get that from texting. It's
Mhm.
not happening in FaceTime, at least to the degree that it does in person. So interpersonal connectivity is about looking someone in the eye, having your middle ear process what they're saying, reading orbital muscles, watching facial and bodily gestures, and understanding these cues that happen so fast we haven't the ability to process them at a conscious level. And so when we're not having that, when we're on our phones and we're doing these other things, we're not getting calmed down by other people. This stems from the work of Dr. Stephen Porges and his polyvagal theory. He gave a keynote. It was probably 10 years ago, where he said, and he's a professor emeritus at a number of medical schools. And Steve said, what I'm teaching you now is not typically taught, it's really cutting edge. It's not typically taught in medical schools, but it will be in 10 years. What's interesting, my son was finishing his doctorate at Duke University, and they were talking polyvagal theory. I mean, it's already out there, and it's just going like crazy because it's backed by science. And polyvagal theory speaks to how you and I, when we're in this relationship together, are conveying safety to one another. How we can relax our nervous system around one another and feel comfortable with one another. If we're not getting that because of devices, then our nervous system is always going to be amped up just more and more and more. And so that's why relationships are so important, why connectivity is so important.
Mhm.
I think devices are the biggest blind spot to relationships between parent and child and partners in a relationship than anything else right now.
So as a young adult who's living in a world where you got group chats, texting, Snapchat,
Mhm.
dating apps, how do I set the example of it's kind of like the scripture term of like, living in the world but not of it. How do I
Mhm.
live in this technology world but avoid some of the downfalls of it? Like what can I do? Because again, like what you're saying, like I cannot stand texting because so much gets misinterpreted, and I try and call
Yeah.
people, I try and FaceTime, but there's just nothing that can replicate face to face, being in person,
Mhm.
communication with people. But we live in a world, especially once you're done with college, like as a young adult, from 25 to, on, you're not really surrounded by a bunch of young adults frequently to be able to meet people. So you're kind of reliant on this technology. So from your perspective, what would you say, someone in this situation can do to balance that of like, all right, I don't want this to negatively impact my ability to build and have meaningful relationships, but also obviously we all have to have phones. We all have to, have I don't know, maybe that's your advice. Just get rid of phones and then we're all good. But
Well, it's not going to happen, right?
yeah,
So we have to live in reality. Planet Norm, maybe there's not any phones, but we're not on Planet Norm. So
right.
it's got to be balance, right? It's got to be balance. The you know, I would encourage people. I would encourage your listeners to do a YouTube video search for Dr. Don Grant and technology, and pull up some of his lectures on this. It's fascinating. And so, yeah, they're a necessary evil at times, and they're also a blessing at times because they allow you to get on dating apps. But if you're on these things the whole day, or when you're around other people, you're around family members, be very intentional about turning off the phones or putting the phones on do not disturb and setting them down. Make time for meals where you're not on your phones. My brother had a great rule in his family: no phones at the table ever. Period.
Mhm.
We just don't have phones at the table. Some families have designated timeouts where from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. there's no phones. You're not allowed to be on your phone during this time. And so the idea of being very, very intentional about times that you're not on your device, most especially of course, when you're with other people who are important to you. Um, Making time to look people in the eye and communicating directly. Um, it's interesting. For over 80% of people who have iPhones, the last thing they do before they go to sleep is look at their phone. And the first thing they do in the morning when they get up is look at their phone, right? And there's an addiction component to that Dr. Grant
Mhm.
has studied. And so finding the balance, they're going to be there, Carter, but we've got to learn to live with them. And it reminds me in the book in First Nephi when Lehi was talking about his dream. And there's a verse there that my mission president taught me. And he said, and Lehi was being described as, and his mind was so caught up in these wonderful things that he beheld not the filthiness of the river. So where is our mind? What are we focused on? Because those things are going to be out there. We don't have to focus on those if we occupy ourselves with the things that are important, such as our familiar relationships and our friendships. Put down the phones, set them down, put them on do not disturb, and really connect with people and watch your anxiety drop. Although, let me be very transparent. There's a separate anxiety that comes from what am I missing because I don't have my phone in my hand?
Yeah,
Am I missing texts? Am I missing likes? Am I missing posts? Right. And if we have that to a significant degree, there's feedback in and of itself that we might be addicted to this thing as opposed to using it as a tool in our life.
I definitely feel that during a transfer portal season for UNC. I'm like just waiting to see who commits. It's just like what I got to be on my phone so I know who's joining the team. But I
I
think
can
I
neither
have
confirm or deny the same sentiment. All right.
exactly.
I just finished reading an article. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Well,
agree.
I think I one final just question for you based on that. For me, one of the most difficult parts of dating is the early dating communication.
Uh-huh.
And especially because that is so reliant on texting, it's so reliant on maybe, I mean, this is asking a lot for people nowadays, maybe even a phone call. How do
Mhm.
how do we how do we do that in a healthy way where, all right, if I meet someone, I get their phone number, or I meet
Mhm.
somebody through Instagram, or I get a referral or a dating app. How do I don't just what's your advice on communication when sometimes it is heavily reliant on technology? What would be your advice on that in early dating to try and do it in a healthy way that can lead to a potentially meaningful connection once you're in person, once you're kind of there? What can you do to give yourself the best chance to be successful when communicating that way early on in dating?
I would say make the transactional parts of it, the logistical parts of it, sure, text about that stuff. What time do you want to meet? This and that,
Mhm.
what have you. Um, and yeah, you're gonna probably divulge things about one another. That fun time when you're exploring the relationship and you're getting to know each other. But if the majority of your conversation is through texting, then you're not making that neurobiological and might I say spiritual connection. You're getting to know one another at a cognitive level, but that's just one portion of attunement. And if a relationship's going to succeed, you've got to be attuned to one another. And you cannot be attuned to somebody you don't have physical interaction with and eye contact and connection. And if you want a successful relationship that's built on connectivity and attachment, then you can use the phone for certain tasks, but you're gonna have to do that face to face, holding hands, while getting to know one another, having conversations, laughing with one another in person.
Yeah, I love that. I'm just like I'm trying to me and my friends talk about all the time, like how can we move away from any form of texting to the bare minimum so that you're getting those opportunities to actually connect in person as much
Yeah.
as you can. And I think it's hard because again, we live in a world where I don't think everybody's on that same page where they're like, I want to connect in that way. But again, maybe that's just a sign that they're not ready to
I was
form
gonna
a
say
relationship.
that's data, right? Before, that old expression, before marriage, you go in with your eyes wide open. After marriage, your eyes half shut. It's data. It's getting information. If someone is really more into their phone and wanting to communicate that way, then there could be something they're avoiding. Then it could be something going on. And so your task is to just take a look at that feedback. Is
Mm.
this somebody I really want to be with who's not willing to draw a boundary there? around a device to get to know me better.
Yeah. No, I love the mindset of viewing it as data and almost sorting instead of rejection, because I think that's a much healthier place to be. I feel like I should have my parents send you. I'm not 26 yet, so I have my own insurance. I'll have them send you my insurance card, and we can charge you for this therapy session. But is there anywhere if someone's interested in trying to connect with you or reach out to you, or you if you have any work, do you have any whether I don't not contact information, but like a website or anything like that, that people, if they are interested in learning more about you or what you do, that they can reach out to or kind of look at?
Thank you for asking. Actually, no, not right now. I'm actually not in a private practice right now, but I'm happy to share my number. If somebody wants to reach out and has some questions, if I can be of help to somebody, I'm happy to be. My number is 435-632-7767. And it'd be ironic to say it, but send me a text.
Mhm.
I'll get
Yeah.
back to you. Right. Yeah, any of your listeners, I can help them, point them in the right direction for something. Because at the end of the day, we're all here to take care of each other, right? So if
Yeah.
I can be of help, I'm happy to be of help.
I love that. Well, I appreciate you giving us an hour of your time, and I know for me, just these again, I don't think I'm gonna find one solution when it comes to dating. I don't think I'm gonna find this magical answer where the light bulb comes. I think I'm realizing that just as I have these conversations, as I build these connections, that's the answer to starting to heal myself and my own dating journey. Is just trying to have more open in honest and vulnerable conversations. And so I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to do that with you. And I know, at least for me, lots of helpful insights. And I know for, again, like we said before, our millions of listeners, they also will gain some valuable insights. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm happy to do it, and I appreciate my relationship with your family. You guys are wonderful people, and very, very grateful to have had this opportunity. Thank you.
Of course. Well, it's easy to do that when we're on the same page with the most important things of God and basketball. So,
Can I get an amen? Can I get an
amen.
amen?
All right. Thank y'all for listening to this episode. Follow us anywhere on social media or anywhere you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts will be on there. Until next time, we're learning to become the one so that we can attract the one. We'll see y'all next time.